listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mathieson, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everybody. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host with today's episode of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. This is going to be just an excellent episode today for all of you, be it subrogation claims people, attorneys, or just anybody who's just interested in the insurance industry in general. Today, I'm honored to have just an amazing woman, Caryn Siebert, joining me today. Caryn's the Vice President of Carrier Engagement with Gallagher Bassett. Caryn knows everybody. You know, I've spoken with Caryn a few times. We've done some joint presentations, walked around with her at conferences, and realized that this is probably the most famous and or popular person in the insurance biz. So Caryn, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I don't know. That's a big introduction. I hope I can live up to it, right?
Well, it's great running into you and just walking around and, talking for a few minutes and 14 people come up and say, Caryn, great to see you. I mean, it is really spectacular. I mean, you've done some amazing stuff in the industry. And that's kind of what I want to go into today, kind of get some of your insights, some of your thoughts on where the industry is going, trends, a bit about you and your kind of amazing career, and then also kind of get your thoughts. There's a lot of people that listen to the podcast or maybe new to claims, new to insurance, and kind of get your thoughts on, where we think and what advice you may have for them as, you've really built up an amazing career. To start, why don't you just tell me a bit about yourself and your kind of really illustrious career in the insurance industry?
I was going to say my illustrious career is because I was a failure. So I actually wanted to be a veterinarian. And growing up as a kid in Brooklyn, New York, that was my dream. I was going to, heal the world of puppies and cats and rabbits and all the animals. Instead, after the third time of passing out in lab class, I was told that I do not have a future in medicine and I should pursue something else. And I think part of the reason that you and I got to meet so many people when we were walking around is I asked my parents, I said, what do you think I should do? And my dad said, well, you have a big mouth and you're always talking to people. So why don't you go and become a lawyer? I'm like, okay, that sounds just as good as anything else. I'll go become a lawyer. And so that was the beginning of the journey. I actually did go to law school. I went to New York Law, graduated. And during the summers, I clerked for a local assemblyman. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? He's dealing with these issues on garbage cans and traffic lights and noise and potholes. This is not what I want to do for a job. And so I told him I didn't know what kind of a career he thought he'd have, but that this is not for me. So I quit that as well. And ironically, after, several years as a practicing attorney, I went in-house. I worked for Crum and Foster for several years, helped with the reorganization and sale of the different divisions from Crum, and went along with one called Coregis, which did a lot of public entity, was the general counsel for Coregis, and then eventually became the chief claim officer for that company. And along the way, relocated to Chicago, relocated to Kansas. And so begins the path of meeting people across the whole country, right? Unfortunately, 9/11 happened, and it's 24 years, give or take, since the tragedy. GE, who owned the company that I worked for at the time, decided to get out of insurance because we insured the World Trade Center. And so eventually I relocated. I moved to Seattle, Washington. I went to Safeco Insurance and was the chief claim officer there. We had commercial, we had personal, we had workers' compensation and surety, all different lines of business, which was another amazing company to be with. But it was eventually sold to Liberty. And I came to California. My parents had retired in the meantime, and I used those skills. And I got a phone call from a friend who knew a recruiter. And the recruiter's like, hey, we're looking for a president and chief operating officer of a small TPA. Would you be interested? And it's like, well, I've never done that before. And they're like, yeah, but you've led hundreds of people. You've had responsibility for huge budgets. You've dealt with a variety of issues, right, in the claims industry. Why not give it a shot? And got the role. had a great 10 years at that company, growing it, doing some mergers and acquisitions, and eventually left there, came over to, well, it doesn't matter, but I basically made a changeover and then came to Gallagher Bassett. That company was sold. So it's been amazing. The advice on that too was, had I said, well, I've never done that before, I'm not going for it, I would never have gotten to do it. Taking a chance on yourself and getting outside of your comfort zone to try something different, but yet all those skills along the way totally came into play, right? Understanding negotiation, understanding the different areas of claims and commercial lines and personal lines. It all came into play. Very exciting, fabulous career, a ton of people along the way who I had the pleasure of mentoring and coaching and working with and learning from mistakes that I made as well, right? So that always makes you a little bit wiser along the trail. And along the way, you and I got to meet, and that was fabulous. So I'm excited to be with you today and pass along some hopefully great nuggets for our audience.
Absolutely. And in your background, I mean, I think that that's kind of what's so special about the insurance industry is because there's so many different places for people to fit in. And you really got the background in claims, the background in claims management, the background in actual management of a company, right? And dealing with mergers and acquisitions, really seeing a bit of everything. And that's where like your insight when we've given these presentations, when I've spoken, it's really fascinating. Plus, of course, just all those people you now know, having worked with all these companies. I think it's really special for a new person entering the industry to kind of understand is get the background, get the experience, but also take risks, jump in, do new things. I think that's very cool. Now, currently in your role, Caryn, is the Vice President of Carrier Engagement. What are you doing over there at Gallagher?
I love being an ambassador, if you will, for Gallagher Bassett. And my role is to talk to people at different insurance carriers around North America about the issues that they're facing, right? So things such as our computer system needs to be sunset. We need to buy a new system. If you partner with Gallagher Bassett in the claims handling side, we have a system. It comes with the package. Or they're experiencing very high turnover. They don't have a training program anymore because it got cut maybe during the expense reviews. And so we'll say, well, then instead of having fixed cost of hiring people over and over again, having them leave, why don't you partner with us? We have Gallagher U. We have a university, right, where we train people. We have internship programs where we bring in new folks and train them as well. We have experienced seasoned adjusters. We call them resolution managers who got the expertise in your line of business. Let's partner. Don't look at us as a threat. We're not looking to eliminate other people's positions. We're looking to help you grow. I love to work with the smaller carriers and mutual insurance companies where mom and dad may have started the company, decades ago, or grandparents did, and the succession plan is now thin and the kids don't want to take over the business. So we'll work with them on how can you now grow into other lines? How can you grow into other states? And then I'll talk to them about things that they should be concerned about. What's happening with social inflation right now? What's happening with these large verdicts? Where are we on tracking a variety of things? And scale, and this kind of leads into subrogation. Scale is something that I love to talk to them about because we bring scale to the table. When I was in different positions in the past, and this is kind of a segue into some of your expertise, obviously, with subrogation, subrogation was kind of like this stepchild. It's like, oh yeah, and now we've got to do this subro stuff. But the resolution managers, claims adjusters in those prior companies would say, well, that's going to slow me down. I'm not going to be able to hit my closing ratio. I'm not doing things quickly enough, whatever. And so at one of my prior companies, I said, look, why don't we do this? We already do salvage as a separate department where we have split auto into bodily injury and physical damage. And then physical damage, we then do the salvage separately. We have specialists who are getting the titles and clearing titles. There's all this expertise that leads to the claim having a better outcome. Why can't we do the same thing for subrogation? So we went ahead and we created a centralized subrogation unit where the claim professionals on the claim itself knew that they should refer a file over to the subrogation team. And that way they could keep their claim moving forward and resolving the claim itself while the subrogation team is working on that aspect of it. And it got such good attention that when I would present in the C-suite, they would ask, okay, what's happening in the commercial claim side with bodily injury, let's say, or what's happening in the homeowner side with reconstruction costs and remediation and our water extraction. And then what's happening on the auto side on our subrogation. And that became a topic. So I think it's critical. And that's one of the things that I'll be out there speaking about when I'm with different carriers that I'm talking to about issues is we have at Gallagher Bassett a centralized subrogation team where that's what they focus on. There's so much money out there that when you're talking to your insureds, when you're talking to your insurance carriers, your goal is to reduce the total cost of risk and getting that money back through the subrogation process is part of what we do to generate superior outcomes and reduce their total cost of risk. So it all comes full circle into what I do now with Gallagher Bassett.
And the Gallagher claims team, I mean, just great people. I mean, we have a long-lasting partnership with Gallagher Bassett and just amazing people on the centralized claim team or even the dedicated teams have some great people. One thing, so it sounds like in your role, a lot of it is optimizing insurance claims processes. And I think that that's hugely important. You know, we do a lot of work for some of these mutual insurance carriers, smaller carriers, where you're right, maybe just last, 2-3 decades ago, it was formed by, a brother and sister. And next thing you know, they're now in 8 states and they really have no idea what they're doing now. And they're running the same procedures, same claims management system, all the same stuff that they did when they kind of built it in their garage. And I feel like that's such a special place. We've helped on just the subro side with that, where we'll come in and we'll help build SOPs. We'll work with the TPAs for the company. We'll try to build this out. And it's kind of wild, the bad practices that just get ingrained. And it's not because anyone stuck to it. It's just because nobody's ever thought about it, right? There's so many different legs and arms and moving parts to every insurance carrier that building out the right subrogation or even claims practice in general, it's tough. They're in 3 states. We're talking about their auto claims, trying to find ways to help them. And we just get to talking like, our adjusters, their recovery percentages. We did an industry session and we found out that, this is the average recovery rate for our industry and we're way below. Like we can't figure out why. We just start talking and find out that their adjusters, all 3 of them have at least 750 to 1,000 claims each. It's like, I can tell you, let's solve this problem right now. Way
Right.
too many claims, not the right thing. But then you go back well, this has been our capacity for the last 20 years, We never knew that was an issue. So I feel like that's a special thing that you're doing, is able to go in there and use decades of experience to be like, here's some of the things that I've seen work. Here's what doesn't work. Let's integrate those procedures. Let's centralize subro. Let's bring in the Gallagher team to help where they can. Is that kind of about right? Am I on?
Well, and it's interesting that they have so many hundreds of files each. We wouldn't even think about having that many files. Even on a medical only desk, we don't have that many files. That's crazy. And then you wonder why people burn out or why they leave the industry or why it is they think they're not being paid enough. No, you definitely have to have the right number of files and the right person on the right type of file with that expertise that they bring to the table and understand the sensitivities, right? Subrogation, yes, we want to know how much you recovered. Okay, fine. But it's not just the hard dollar amount of how much you're recovering. It's also the percentage of what was available to be recovered. And then you're analyzing the cash flow basis. I can get 90% of what I want within the next week, or I can drag this thing out and try to get 100%, but it might take me 6 months. Which is the better route to go? Where's the efficiency? What's the better outcome at the end of the day? And so you're balancing, I'd rather take the 90% now and move on to the next file and start trying to recover on that one rather than trying to squeeze more juice out of a lemon and then risking it's not there. The other elements of that, so you've got, yes, the recovery amount, the hard dollar amount, the cycle time, but expertise, just like with what you were talking about earlier, a lot of carriers now have their panel list, which is great, but you really need to kind of also have a sub-panel list for subrogation because it's a beast on its own. It's not a matter of, I'm going to prepare this case to go to trial. This is all about the negotiation and the claim within the claim. The subrogation professionals should look at the claim resolution managers as their best friend, because that file, right from the beginning, having the pictures, having the contracts, understanding who's got what obligations to whom, what's been tendered already to somebody else. Those fundamental things that go into subrogation can enable them to be a unit manager down the road with the skills to start handling the overall claim itself down the road. Maybe they go into large loss mitigation. Who knows? But it's part of that career track where you shouldn't be looked at that subrogation, is this stepchild. It's part and parcel. And it actually gets pretty sophisticated when you get into a self-insured. I certainly don't deal with self-insureds these days, but we have a team that does. And in the past, when I was in that area, you'd have to understand that, yes, maybe you could, as the, large box store, subrogate against somebody who supplied you with, pick an item. But, let's say that would have been defective and I would have sued, and they could have subrogated against the manufacturer of that. But it's the only supplier of that item and there's a shortage. That self-insured might say, I appreciate the fact that I can subrogate and that you can tender this to someone else, but please don't, because I'll never get that product again and that supplier won't want to deal with me. So they have a business decision to make. And those subrogation professionals need to understand that and document the file as to, here's why we didn't pursue this. It was the customer's request.
That's where having kind of subrogation expertise is really important. And I think that interplay between the frontline adjusters, right, the people making that initial red flag, then going to subrogation, that collaboration, that cooperation is hugely important. I've been doing this a little over a decade, not nearly as experienced as you, Caryn, but I still remember a lot of my clients, they didn't have centralized subro, right? They didn't work with TPAs with centralized subro. The adjuster handled everything from the underlying claim to the liability issues, to the SIU, to the salvage, to the subrogation. And yes, subrogation really took a back seat. But recently, I think the vast majority of my clients and our TPAs now, they do have that centralized aspect to it. They have subrogation experts, where previously, subrogation was down in the basement, hidden behind the water heaters, and you had to go through this long, dank, dark, drippy hallway to get to it. And it was where people's, they say that, is that where their careers go to die? And the answer is today, absolutely not. I truly see most of my clients, high up executives, they're really having a focus on this. This is kind of the new age claims, because the hard part is we now have data and we have metrics, and we have people like you, Caryn, who are able to go out there and optimize these processes and bring back what is typically tax-free dollars, right? It's the way to kind of, our website, we have a video, like a kind of like a commercial, and it's about erasing, it's like time traveling and erasing exposures, right? It's a way to erase that exposure to bring the money back. Now, you briefly mentioned this, but, when it comes to kind of those C-suite, right, the upper level management, are they talking about subrogation? What are they saying? What's their involvement in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you said that, because you started giving me flashbacks of that movie Office Space with Milton and his red stapler. And they just kept, pushing him further and further down. But you never knew what Milton actually knew. Right. And it turned out he was the one on the beach at the end of the movie, relaxing with his pina coladas. So I think that our subrogation professionals can relate to that and know that they can have a great, great career. And we were talking about what happens in the C-suite. I give you an example where we were talking about what conferences do we want to attend. And so one of the ones that was on my list to attend was NASP. And the president was like, what's a NASP? I'm like, no, National Association of Subrogation Professionals. And they actually have Subrogation Professional Day, where we can actually have our team. And we actually did. We had our team dress up, and they were throwing money up in the air, and they were lifting each other and celebrating because, they had reached, $1 million in recoveries. And that was, one of the milestones that we had set for the year, was to break $1 million in recovery. So it definitely became part of the discussion at this insurance carrier to make sure that we did attend NASP, that we were on the panels, and you would see NASP grow year over year. It is growing. There are more service providers. There's more attorneys who are sharing their knowledge and their expertise, like you, on how to avoid litigation, how to actually have conversations with each other and keep this from going into litigation. But some people aren't necessarily buying into that. So now NASP actually has a litigation conference, a separate litigation conference, because again, as much information is shared, not everybody agrees with the approach. So it definitely then becomes an issue in the C-suite to determine, are we maximizing the recoveries? Are we getting our clients, funds back, so to speak? Are the loss runs up to date? And so your loss runs need to be accurate, reflect the recoveries in one of the fields. So that becomes an important item to make sure that that is accurate. And then to make sure the linkage is there, because as you mentioned, SIU, and we have centralized SIU. We have a service provider that works with us as our SIU team. And then we do the centralized subrogation, as we were just talking about a little bit earlier. But it's a great place to learn from each other and understand how the claim process works. Because even as a subrogation professional, your resolution manager partner is guiding you along the way, saying, here's what I need, here's where we're at, here's information I just found out, right? And it can be in any line of business. So you might have a commercial loss where you find out that, it's a large construction claim. And all of a sudden you find out that the plumber didn't install the pipes the right way. Now we're going to definitely finish handling the claim itself. But in the meantime, we're subrogating after the plumber who improperly installed. Or maybe it's a regular car accident, a personal lines car accident. And you have to subrogate against the other insurance carrier to get the person's deductible back. I mean, it can be anything from a small $500, item to a multi-million-dollar, item that you're pursuing. So I think it definitely has the attention in the C-suite because all those dollars add up.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that I've been confronting, I guess we've always confronted, is kind of a race to the bottom on contingency fees for some of these law firms, TPAs, subro vendors, where everyone's trying to do it for less. And some of the results from some of these kind of, I don't want to say bottom barrel, but some of these smaller, be it subro vendors, TPAs, it's hard because the hard part is, unless you can truly dig into the data and the metrics, it's almost impossible to judge how well somebody's doing at subrogation from a company-wide basis. A lot of these TPAs, a lot of these subro vendors, they're giving themselves an A for D work. And the client or the company, they have no idea. It's like, hey, we're bringing money in. Well, we brought in $1 million this year, despite the fact if it was done better, they could have brought in $50 million. I think that's a really hard part in the industry. And, I had a client, being self-insured, quite recently. Go down, meet with them down south. We're talking and like, well, you know what, Ashton, your contingency fee at, 25% pre-suit, 1/3 post-suit, that's just really high. We're currently paying 1%. Setback, 1%. Do tell, please tell me. Yeah, we have this company we've been working with. They're handing it at a 1% contingency fee for all recoveries. And they brought in $8 million last year for us. This is amazing. We can't even discuss this unless it's a big complex one. Maybe we'll use you guys. I'm like, all right, we got to talk more. I agree. If that is true, that's amazing. But when things seem too good to be true, they usually are. And I got to asking in the process, oh yeah. This company, they don't have employees. They just send it's a computer system that sends a template demand letter once every 2 months. And then if they get paid, beautiful. If they don't get paid, the case is just closed at the statute of limitations. So nobody would know, right? We look at that. I then dug deeper. I'm like, let me see your total exposures. What are we looking at? And we don't have the metrics that I'm sure you guys do in GB. But we were able to say, I'm like, hey, listen, they brought in, $7 million, whatever it was. They should have brought in $150 million minimum. So right now, you're not really, you're stepping over dollars to pick up dimes. You're giving yourself an A for F work. This is a problem. But that's really hard to explain when somebody on the C-suite level is like, well, it's 1% versus, 1/3. What do we do? How do you explain this, or what procedures do you go through or look at data metrics when you're kind of onboarding a new carrier or working with someone?
Yeah. And, it goes full circle to what I was talking about earlier at a prior company where it wasn't just the number of dollars we were getting back. It was also the percentage of what was out there to be recovered that was important, as well as the cycle time. How quickly were you able to get that in? And were you able to avoid litigation because those are just three of the many different metrics that, can be looked at. The other piece of it is, I just did this at the CLM Claims College. I actually was supposed to be a speaker helping out another colleague who had a death in the family. And instead, they had somebody else do it. And I gave her my prop. And my prop was, I blew up a huge $100 bill. I blew it up, big size, and I put little perforated lines on it. And she used it in the presentation, talking about, if you take that, $100, how much of it is for the loss itself? How much of it is for the either ULAE, right? Your unallocated loss adjustment expense. How much of it is your allocated loss adjustment expense? How much of it goes to your TPA, let's say? How much of it is going to the law firms? And so by the time she was done with this $100 bill, there was one little strip left that was worth $1. And so the discussion was, okay, yes, we can certainly add back interest income, investment income, right? We can add back certain things. And adding back subrogation recoveries would be a huge part of making that profit when you think about what's a combined ratio. And in a worst case scenario, she would have actually been giving dollars back to the audience because they actually lost money. So sometimes, when we talk about fees, whether it's the fact that we're at 20% of recovery and you don't pay us unless we recover for you, or in other situations where we're charging a flat fee per regular claim file or a medical only versus a workers' compensation, it's not just the amount of the fee that you're paying. It's the quality of the claim. It's the lost dollars that are going out the door and optimizing those outcomes. So you can't be, penny wise and pound foolish. And you do have to wonder, there was a company, and I don't think they're around anymore, where they were having people settle claims online, just putting 3 bids in on the defense and 3 bids in, for the plaintiff. And if they matched, they'd say, okay, congratulations, your case is settled. Yeah, okay, that was cheap. It was inexpensive to do, but was it actually giving you the results that you wanted? So we've got a lot of benchmarking data, right, on cycle time, on percentages, on who does and doesn't, pay, what are the rules in the different states, the fact that there is subrogation sometimes involved with workers' compensation. That's the goal, right? The goal is also that sometimes we inherit files. And so when we inherit files from another TPA who's, the relationship ended, and they say, hey, Kate, take these over, one of the first things we'll do is look through that file and say, did they even pursue subrogation? And is the statute of limitations up? I mean, I think in most states it's 2 or 3 years. So you got to act very, very quickly to get your letters out to at least stop that clock and be able to start pursuing the subrogation and see what's in the file that can help. While the new resolution manager is getting up to speed, we'll use our generative AI platform to give us a quick summary of what's happening in the file, which will kind of speed things up a little bit. So I agree with you. You always have to wonder what's going on. If they can do it that cheaply, are they really delivering the product that you need? So thinking about both aspects of it.
And that's the problem. The answer is no, that is not delivering the product that you need. But, it's about kind of explaining that to the C-suite, right? And that's something where I feel like it's really unique that you're going out there, you're explaining this. You guys are using data, using metrics, building the right SOPs, the right processes for these carriers to make sure it's done right. When I train, I actually came up with this just a few weeks ago, and I've been using it in most of my trainings, webinars, and it's the 3 Asians for subrogation. There's 3.
All right, you've got me interested. I'm ready.
1, identification, 2, investigation, 3, negotiation, right? It's the 3 Asians. That's me. I'm going to trademark that. Ashton Kirsch. I think that's the biggest part. Identification, because that's what we're talking about, is the interplay between the actual subro handler, the subro people, and then the frontline adjusters, those handling it, and encouraging that communication and collaboration. You said some really nice stuff on that. Any other advice that you have for these carriers on how to encourage the 2 heads to talk together and work together to make sure that claims are identified, investigated, and then obviously subro will handle the negotiations?
I don't know, but I mean, I think on my weekend, I'm going to have to figure out how to turn your 3 Asians into those 5 Asians now that we included cooperation and communication, and we'll have to come up with like one of those little taglines or something. But I love that. I think that's great. I think that, when you're doing professional liability, I'll give you an example, professional liability of whether an attorney committed malpractice or a doctor committed malpractice. You're looking at the underlying claim too, though. What were the damages? What actually happened? If he or she did commit malpractice, what happened? What was the negative thing? And I think that's the way it can be thought of in the subrogation world. You're partnering with that resolution manager on the file to say, what did you find out? Who else is involved? And think outside the box. So the house catches on fire because the couch went on fire and the drapes on fire, all because a laptop was sitting right on something plastic, which was sitting on the couch.
Right.
I mean, you don't necessarily think about that's a subrogation claim. And then if it's the laptop, or is it the battery within the laptop? And if it's the battery within the laptop, was it made in China? And will you ever see a dime? And should you spend time on this? Or are you looking for a pattern and any other claims that may have come the same way? And so now you've got a class action suit. I mean, I'm just blowing it up, obviously, for exaggeration. But that's the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about when we're pursuing this and not go, well, it's just XYZ. Don't use that word, it's just. Because when you think about how all those dollars add up across hundreds and thousands of claims across the whole industry, draw the analogy, if you will, to your point earlier about SIU. That's fraud. It wasn't a 42-inch burn pattern. It was a 60-inch burn pattern or whatever. I mean, looking at those kind of things. Oh, well, I had cherry, wood cabinetry or walnut, that's fraud. And when you add it up little by little, you end up with billions of dollars in fraud happening across the industry. And guess who's paying for it, Ashton? You and I. And every person on this audience, they are paying for it. So it's the same thing with subrogation. We have to recover those funds that are out there because it impacts all of our rates down the road.
100%. I know, Caryn, we talked about a lot of good stuff. I think the most impactful thing, though, is just kind of with your career. I'd love to know, as we kind of close out the podcast today, what advice do you have for kind of a new insurance professional or a new lawyer getting into the insurance business who's looking to kind of make a name for themselves, start in the industry? What should they be looking at, and what guidance do you have for them?
So we've just covered a lot of technical subjects, a lot on metrics and the different aspects of what we do in this industry. I think one of the most important things that new person should be thinking about is a person like myself, a person like you, who's looking to also mentor others and share our knowledge. Knowledge is more powerful when it's shared. Information is more powerful when it's shared. And you can get those better outcomes. You can move through your career. One of the big mistakes that I've seen with people is they'll do 10 years as such and such an expert, and then all of a sudden they want to become a supervisor. Okay, but what skills do you have to be a supervisor? That's a very different skill set. Leading people versus leading processes. And by the way, they're both critical. If you love handling large claims, become the best that you can be at large loss, complex loss, at mediations, at being out there traveling to different mediations, setting up mediation days. Don't think that the only way to move up is by supervising necessarily other people, right? I have nobody reporting to me now. In the role that I have, which is critical to Gallagher Bassett, I'm out there in the marketplace. I'm bringing in new strategic partnerships. I'm working with all these different people, bringing my past expertise to the table, but not leading in terms of having people report to me that way. I'm leading in a very different way. And I think part of that advice to young professionals or even older professionals who are switching it up and going into a new role is to take that expertise that others have to offer and know that we want to pay it forward. That's one of the reasons, back in whatever it was, 2010, Business Insurance named me a woman to watch. They pick 25 women every year. It's about paying it forward. It's about being able to coach and mentor other people and share that information and expertise. We have a mentorship program that we continue to bring in new people. I work with a group called RISE, Rising Insurance Star Professionals. They have a mentoring program where others in the industry and outside of your company can mentor you. You and I are both in CLM. We have the Phenoms under 40, which is a great way to get some people recognized. You were recognized through that award because it's realizing that the younger professionals who are starting to build up their resumes and their credentials as they build their careers need that kind of support from the industry veterans. And then you get the industry veterans, right? So now I'm an industry veteran. Last year, I was blessed. I was inducted into the Insurance Business America Hall of Fame, which is 35 years and more experience. We'll just call it that and more.
Oh, and don't forget the CLM Lifetime Achievement Award in 2020. That's 2024, right?
2024.
That was a big deal. The whole organization honored you, Caryn.
That was huge. And that's such a great recognition. And it really does show that you build friendships and relationships over the decades. And that's so important for the young professionals to realize. Now we're getting out more. We're doing great podcasts like this. Get to know each other, meet other people. Don't be shy about going to a mixer and get out of your comfort zone. No, but everybody's a somebody, right? You never know who is going to be that next person who can introduce you to another opportunity or to another company who could use your services. And I think that's the way we have to treat each other with respect in the industry and realize that we've got a lot of people getting ready to retire. And where are we going to find that new talent? And everybody has the potential to succeed. Just share that information with each other, share your stories, and just help lift each other up in this crazy industry, which is basically recession resistant. We're not recession proof, but we're definitely recession resistant. And there's always a need for insurance out there.
Absolutely. No question. Well, I know that Gallagher Bassett, the insurance industry in general, and everybody is very happy that you did not become a veterinarian or even a STEM senator. I mean, I would vote for you, though, just for the record. I'd be happy to run the campaign, Caryn. If that's the next decision, I'll be. I mean, we do. I mean, I thank you for joining the podcast and just thank you for all that you do for the industry. I think your words are incredibly motivational to newer people that are coming into the field, or those, like you mentioned, those who've been in the field and kind of transitioning to a new place in their career. But, that's excellent.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to watching you continue to blossom and grow along the way here. I got to meet one of your mentees recently, so that was fabulous. Looking forward to listening to this podcast and others along the way. So thanks for what you do, Ashton.
Of course, Caryn, and I'm sure you and I will discuss possible future content, maybe NAS presentations, CLM. We'll talk about what was my 3 Asians, but maybe the 5 Asians going forward. The audience will see that topic coming up in the very near future. But yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, audience. This is Ashton Kirsch, Caryn Siebert, signing off from this episode of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Until next time.